I don't know whose phone that is. That's your, okay. All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll get started. Thank you for coming. My name is Aaron Korewa. I'm the director of the Atlantic Council's office in Warsaw. I would like to start off by apologizing on behalf of my friend and my boss, Mr. Jörn Fleck, who was supposed to moderate this panel. Unfortunately, he came down with the flu this morning, and in good conscience, he couldn't come into this room not feeling well. I just came in from Globsec, from Prague. I didn't have any official role in Bled. I was just going to be here to listen and to learn. This is my first time in Bled and in Slovenia, but here, due to unforeseen events, I'm going to have to moderate this panel. But this is a fascinating topic. We have a great panel. We have a great group of people here in the audience as well. So I'm really, really looking forward to this. The Atlantic Council's Warsaw office, we relaunched our office about 2 years ago, and we do this because the Atlantic Council, of course, is very keen on strengthening and maintaining transatlantic ties with our key allies, with America's key allies in Europe. This panel's named the Fading Pax Americana. We'll see if it is fading. But obviously, I mean, the US 2024 presidential election is a pivotal moment with far-reaching implications for global dynamics. Of course, the United States remains a key player in international affairs, and the outcome of this election will undoubtedly shape global developments and politics with understandably crucial consequences for many countries worldwide. As my good friend, Ambassador Daniel Fried, often says, and I think he's absolutely right about this, that for a long time, as an American, when you come to Europe and you speak to Europeans, you could say, look, it doesn't really matter who wins this election, because at the end of the day, the United States is going to be invested in a transatlantic relationship. Well, this year, it's not really like that. This year, you could say the outcome of this election is going to have far-reaching implications for our transatlantic ties. Should Donald Trump become president again, we could probably expect some major divergence from truths or practices that we've held for a long time. But at the same time, should Kamala Harris win, we don't know if there's going to be a continuation or a break with the policies of the Biden administration. Things are a little bit in flux. And to address this, we have a terrific panel. As I said before, we have Dr. Tobias Lindner, who is the Minister of State of the German Federal Foreign Office. We have Dr. and Undersecretary Jakub Wiśniewski from the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have Dr. Nathalie Tocci from the Istituto the Internazionali Affari. No, okay, sorry, I'll do the American translation. Institute of International Affairs. Okay, of Italy. Yes, that was right. All right. We have Ambassador or Doctor, I don't know, Ambassador? Okay, Ambassador Philippe Étienne, who is the former ambassador to the United States of the French Republic. And we have Dr. Małgorzata Bonikowska, who is the president of the Center for International Relations Foundation of Poland. Yeah, well, the American way of doing things is always to mention the doctor PhD. Let me then kick off and start with you, Dr. Lindner, Tobias. So obviously, I would like to start off with one of the topic that's not only on everybody's minds, but is also of enormous importance. I happen to believe that the war, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, is one of the most important conflicts in the world, at least since 1945. Let's be frank. That's, I firmly believe in that. And it's obviously a priority for you. And for Berlin. So I guess, to start with a very pointed question, like, how is Germany preparing for any potential shift from Washington regarding Ukraine policy? Like, should Washington all of a sudden, sharply change course and ends its support for Ukraine? What is Germany going to do? I'll start off with a nice, easy one.
Good morning, and thanks for having me, and thanks for the nice and easy question. And the usual phrase of a politician would be, "I do not speculate," and so on and so forth. But let's be honest. Everyone's watching what's going on in the US. Everyone's preparing for November the 5th. We do so too. So what I can say is that we are trying to review and to estimate the policies of the both candidates, and to set up scenarios, what could happen if A or B is elected, and so on and so forth. And for sure, Ukraine is one part of that analysis. That's true. And if we are honest, Europeans and Americans need each other vis-a-vis when it comes to support for Ukraine, be it military support, be it reconstruction, be it humanitarian assistance. None of the two sides can do it alone. And how should we prepare? I'm convinced we need continuously to speak with people in Washington, with people in both teams, in both camps, around the candidates, as well as on the Hill. And we need at least to try to convince American politicians, lawmakers, people in the White House, that it's not only about our own security interests, and it's not a conflict in the backyard of Europe or something. This is really a fundamental threat, this aggression, to the international rules-based order. And it's also intertwined with American security interests. And to be blunt, if Europe should be left alone with this, then Europe would need to focus on it. And I have understood that the United States, is a country with two coasts and two oceans on both sides. And if in Washington people expect that the Europeans stand up when it comes to security in the Indo-Pacific, if they want us to understand that our security is also interlinked to the Indo-Pacific, it's vis-a-vis with American support for security here in Europe. That would be my answer. And try to explain it continuously, explain it more often, and at least try the best. If in the end someone would say we cancel the whole support, okay, then we are in a new game. But don't get desperate and believe we will end up in that game. Do the best that it comes differently. That would be my answer.
Thank you. Then moving on, Jakub, over to you. So, I mean, obviously Poland has largely benefited, I mean, both under the Trump and the Biden presidencies. Let's be frank about that. So sort of how are you looking into these, this potential second term for either of them? I mean, of course, would a more inward-looking America, what would that mean for Poland? Because I mean, the office is based in Warsaw. We all know that Poland places a lot of importance on the transatlantic ties for security, but let's say you're faced with a more inward-looking America, what are you going to do then? And particularly if you can address this from the point of view of the upcoming Polish presidency of the EU in January. I mean, it's kind of an opportunity to sort of start and kick off this relationship, whoever sits in Washington in a positive way. Poland has a chance to do that. So what do you, please share some thoughts on that.
Do I turn it on? Yes.
Yes.
So I'm a diplomat, and every diplomat, like every human, has two ears. And I think it's our job to listen with this ear for good news more than with the other ear where bad news comes. And people during election campaigns say strange things. And I think we should not attach too great importance unless we want to find ourselves in trouble where we contribute to self-fulfilling prophecy, where sometimes loosely structured remarks create some frameworks which put us in the confrontational manner. So my message is, and actually that of my government, is keep calm and carry on. Degree of healthy stoicism is in store. That does not mean that we are not getting prepared. It does not mean that we are not using our positive experience from the times when President Trump had relatively positive relations with Warsaw. I think that we put money where mouth is as regards, say, military expenditure. We show that we care about NATO, but at the same time, we want to develop, and this is something new as regards as Polish governments go, we want to show that there is a second pillar to the Polish security insurance policy, which is the European Union. We have to, shortly speaking, if there is less America in Europe, there needs to be more Europe in Europe. That means we have to deliver ourselves, be it about Ukraine, be it about enlargement and our neighborhood. I'm not saying, and Nathalie will confirm how difficult it is to speak about geopolitical Europe and then deliver, because nation states do not transform magically into some imagined community where national selfish interests sometimes are already dropped or cast away. But we can find a consensus, and we have to sort it out, and this is where the Polish presidency comes. We will be the first after Hungarian presidency, and we want to show that we are different, that we care about European interest, that we care about Ukraine. And actually this war is not only about existence of Ukraine, it's about us Europeans, whether we can be sovereign, where we can be self-sustaining actor, and where we can have policies on our own. And this is also about global matters. Europe for too long has been silent or not vocal enough about what it means to have assertive relations with China, about Global South. There is clear misunderstanding, and very often we Europeans find ourselves in strange position where we are criticized over Gaza. So to bring back values to our political stance as Europe, this is one of the themes of the upcoming Polish presidency.
Thank you. Well, we'll drill down a little bit on that later, hopefully. But then, Nathalie, over to you. I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here because, of course, you moderated a similar panel during the Munich Security Conference where you had J.D. Vance, who is now a hopeful in the American election. So, to put it bluntly, I guess, like, after listening to what he said in Munich, are you convinced that Pax Americana is sort of the complete decline of Pax Americana? And I will use the moderator's prerogative to just it will be a double question, because the second question is, of course, you once said that a return of the Trump presidency, I have to quote you right here, would be, quote, the crisis that breaks the EU's back, end quote. So, is the EU destined to failure if Trump returns to the White House?
So,
Two easy questions.
On the first question, let me start off by saying that Pax Americana is already over. And it has been over for the last 10, 15 years, more or less, perhaps 20. We could go back to 2003. If by Pax Americana what we mean is a US-led international order premised on US hegemony in the international system. That world has gone. It was nice while it lasted, but that world has gone. Now, where does the Trump-Harris story come into this? So that world has gone, and I would say that probably the first US president that acknowledged it and acted upon it was Barack Obama, right? And here comes the story, right? Because you can react, the US can react to the end of Pax Americana in two diametrically opposite ways. You can act on it by basically saying, we understand that we can no longer run the show on our own, and therefore the consequence of that conclusion is that we have to double down on alliances and partnerships and redistribute responsibility amongst our allies and partners. Or you can react to that same conclusion or that same premise by basically saying, and therefore, given that we don't have the power to run the world, we have to ensure that we simply run ourselves and look into what our security interests are construed in a very narrow sense, and therefore isolationism, or in a sense, going into a more J.D. Vancian probably approach, prioritize on what really matters, and that is China. So same premise, two diametrically opposite conclusions. So in a sense, the structural story is that Pax Americana is over. The agency story is that you can react to it in very different ways. Now, coming to the second question, the point is that those two diametrically opposite sort of responses to the structural story is hugely consequential to Europe, right? Because in a sense, line one, you double down on alliances and partnerships, is great news for Europe, right? I mean, in a sense, this can actually rebalance the relationship and make it perhaps a more equal partnership, encourage Europeans to take more responsibility, but that doesn't come to the expense of the transatlantic relationship. Option number two is catastrophic for Europe. It was in the first Trump administration, but it is much more so, which is where, in a sense, the danger really lies in a context that we're in today, which is very different from that of 2016, in which there is war on the European continent. It is our war. So, in a sense, and this comes to the point of, what do we do about it? Yeah, I mean, if you have two very different options with two very different sets of consequences for the EU, how do you prepare for that? Instinctively, one would be inclined to assume that therefore you should prepare in very different ways. The good sort of side of the story in this rather bleak scenario is that actually I think that the policy recipe for Europe is exactly the same, whether it is a Harris win or whether it's a Trump win. That we should double down on our democratic resilience given that our democracies are in danger is something which is true in the United States, it's true in Europe, and we should do something about it regardless. That we should double down on defense, including European defense or a European pillar within NATO, and basically assume greater responsibility for Ukraine is something that we should do regardless of a Trump or a Harris win. That we should no longer be starry-eyed vis-a-vis China, but at the same time figure out exactly how to both, in a sense, protect vis-a-vis China, but not ensure that this leads to a protectionism, and certainly not one that, on the one hand, disables us to meet our climate targets, as well as to retain a sort of free trading system. Again, these are choices that apply, whether it's a Harris or a Trump win. Now, obviously, and here is, I think, the paradox in this, that the Trump scenario is one which, on the one hand, puts us on the verge of a potential precipice, but certainly galvanizes us into action, right? I mean, maybe we fail, and this is where the risk of, the camel's back eventually breaking come in, but we're certainly going to do something about it. We're going to try to do something about it because we won't have a choice. The danger, paradoxically, in a Harris scenario is that we're going to sit back and relax, yeah? But that structural story that I started off is going to be the same regardless of these two scenarios.
Very good point to end on. Agency, right? European agency. A slight shift of gears, maybe, Philippe, Ambassador. You were, of course, ambassador to Washington in what many people identified as challenging times, not least from economic point of view. For those of you who don't know, you were ambassador both during the Trump and the Biden administration. And from the economic perspective, obviously there was a trade war under Trump, but then under Biden was the passage of the IRA, which shocked a lot of people in Europe, not least in Paris. So I guess, again, a pointed question to you. I mean, do you see more or less divergence on trade policy with the next American administration, whichever one it may be?
Thank you very much first for inviting me to the Bled Strategic Forum. Thank you, Secretary General. I want also to say hello to the American friends I see in the room. Indeed, this experience as Ambassador of France to the United States was quite a very interesting one. Under two administrations, I was also lucky enough to be in contact with Kamala Harris, but also with Tim Walz and with J.D. Vance. So I find now the whole situation and the electoral campaign really interesting, remembering my life in Washington and in the United States. But before that, I was also ambassador in Germany and permanent representative to the European Union. And my experience in the United States, I took it from the point of view of a European, and I completely agree with Nathalie. When Joe Biden was elected, there was a sense of relief, and the Europeans tending to sit back. And whatever the result of the US election, whatever the decision of the American people will be, the Europeans have to take their own decisions. And I come to your question on Trade and Inflation Reduction Act. It is not a surprise, and it is not even shocking that the American presidents, whoever they are, take the decisions they deem the best for the American people. It's also for the Europeans to do the same. And it's what I say is, in particular, I apply it to the Inflation Reduction Act. We have to consider that we are in a situation where Europe is in a danger of losing a strategic race in technology, in the technologies of the future. The outgoing European Commission and the European member states have started to react. And there is much more to do. They have started to react on the side of defense, on the side of technology, and reindustrialization or attracting investments to Europe. But this is something really we must do very, very much, very quickly, and with a much greater intensity. Again, whatever the result of the American elections will be. But of course, the result is very consequential. It is not the same according to the result. And I come to the question of trade. There is a consensus under the control of the American friends who are here across the American parties, the two big American parties on trade, which is that it is not, the United States is not anymore for free trade agreements, clear, and takes its decision even, I must say, it's regrettable from a European point of view, but independently from the rules of the World Trade Organization. There is a certain amount of consensus across, and it's linked with domestic policy. It's linked with the necessity to regain the support of the blue wall, the middle class, the working class among the American voters. That's clear. On the other hand, under Donald Trump, when he was president, we witnessed measures, very aggressive measures, directed against the European Union. And I will quote two of the measures, one who was taken, one who was on the verge to be taken. The first one is on steel and aluminium, which was to impose tariffs against European countries, allied countries, based on a legal base which was linked to national security. Of course, there was a technical explanation to prevent circumvention of from Chinese imports of steel through other markets, but it was kind of really special to have extra tariffs against allies based on this legal base. And Donald Trump has announced he would do the same across the board of all products now, 10 to 20%. And the second example is a digital services tax, where we were about to have extra tariffs against European allies. And here, and I will close here my first answer, we must be aware of the fact that the issue is not only trade and deficit, it's more and more also a regulatory and legislation issue. The digital services tax was about the introduction in some jurisdiction of a tax on digital services. Now we have in place in Europe new legislations on digital, DSA, DMA, but also on sustainability, CS due diligence directive, for instance, deforestation. There is also a lot of, we have the CBAM on climate-related imports. We have a lot of discussions to have. So according to who will be elected, there is clearly a potential big difference here. And my hope is that whatever the result is, still we can return to a very sound transatlantic dialogue based, for instance, on what has been started, the Trade and Technology Council, but going deeper and discussing those divergences we have on some legislation, because finally we continue to agree on the essential, and the essential is, of course, democracy.
Well, it was yet another call for European agency and action. Good.
Yeah.
In the spirit of that, Małgorzata, to you, I know that you often raise the issue of the Global South, and the Global South was mentioned by the other Polish person on the panel, which, I mean, a little unusual that it is the Poles mainly who talk about the Global South. That doesn't, I mean, as someone who lives in Poland, sometimes that is overlooked. I don't really like the term Global South in general. Maybe you can come up with a better one. But I guess, poignant question again, in the event of, a US that is more insular, looks inward, what should Europe do in terms of its relationship with the Global South? Should we do anything? Is it time to step up and concrete and specific? What would that look like? What would that be?
Thank you for this question. It's really interesting to put this question to a person who comes from Poland. It didn't happen 10 years ago. And let me start by saying that I'm really grateful for the organizers, not only for having me here, but also for having two Poles in this panel. We have a proverb, when there are two Poles, there are four opinions. So maybe that's the reason for that. But in this case, I maybe disagree, because I agree very much with my colleague Jakub, who, by the way, comes also from a think tank world. And we have an excellent cooperation also with our foreign ministry. And what I want also to stress is I'm really grateful to see this panel with these people, because it just reminds me of a Weimar Triangle formula. And thank you very much for having a French, a German, a Pole, plus Italy. Not bad. Yeah, not bad.
We will extend to Italy.
Italy helps. It's also a good country, big country, I like that, We should have these formats more often. And also a moderator is based in Warsaw.
So that's even more, I can't share my opinions.
Well.
That would be even more, it's a double up.
This is maybe, because of the topic, because we are known to be in Europe. Poland is really the most pro-American society. That's also a fact, Unlike France, for example. This is by tradition, because, of course, America was seen for us for many years as a provider of inspiration, history of fighting for freedoms, liberties, which very much is, it clicks, resonates with the Polish identity, right? So we are still pro-American, being very much, especially with this government, pro-European. So this is a good start, because I strongly believe, and Nathalie maybe can help me also to clarify, the strategic autonomy concept. Maybe it started with, this feeling of being a little bit distant from the US, but actually it's in American interest. It's really in American interest having Europe very strong. What sense does it make to have a partner which is weak, right? Just think about it. What sense does it make to just keep always, to help, always be, called for help when something happens? I think the deep American interest is to see the EU strong, also in a sense of security. Then, if you look at the map, I now recall my German colleague statement, I agree a lot, but if you look at the map, it's not only that you see that America has two oceans. Europeans forget. We think it's only transatlantic relations which matter. No, because it's the Pacific. Now, by the way, the Pacific, which is a peaceful ocean, the name comes from this, is not really peaceful at all, and Atlantic Ocean is very peaceful. So it is a shift, the attention, American attention shift to the Pacific, because there are good reasons for that. But don't forget, America has a direct border with Russia. Just look at the map. It's a direct border, as Poland. Poland has a direct border with Russia. Italy doesn't. Germany doesn't. We do. And the US too. So, for the interests of America, they cannot just completely, withdraw from Europe, because it's just to take Russia from the other angle. Now, of course, we have to bear with the just simple statement, there will be America first, whoever will win the elections. And you can see, obviously, with the China race, of course, Biden continues what Trump started. And the race will continue. So for the US, China will be number one country and point of reference. So in this race, China, US, I don't want Europe to be squeezed and neglected. Our interest, European interest, is not to let happen that the world will go again bipolar. If this happens, Europe is not relevant. So in our interest is to keep the balance, is to try to be stronger, as all you said, by the way, I agree totally. It's the momentum. Garry Kasparov was saying yesterday about Putin's effect, right, to Europe, that Putin helped us to unite. But I would also mention Trump effect. I think between Putin and Trump, we are doing better, you know, in this reality. We are trying to, you know, repair the EU. So I think we have to just bear with this reality that American interest will be to build a position vis-à-vis China. And in this regard, we have to build a very strong position of the EU vis-à-vis both, And then I come to your question about Global South. Well, I believe, I agree with you, the name is not very good maybe, because the many countries of the Global South are not even on the South. And like Mexico, for example, maybe. And, but we have also a problem with the notion Global West. And again, there are many countries of the Global West who are not even on the West. So we have to reorganize this thinking in a way to put maybe completely different labels. But I do believe what brings us together, a part of trade, this is also another paradox, that the EU and the US do very good business. By the way, the US is our #1 partner in trade. In services is #1, 22% of the total global trade of the EU is US, 22%. Then it's the UK, 18%. Then it's Switzerland and China. And in trade of goods, Americans are #1 provider as far as partner as far as whom we sell. It's in #2 from whom we buy. Who is #1? China. So that shows, you know, the realities that economically we will do with both, with China, with the US. And in this regard, maybe we are not on the same page with the US, that we don't want really to be totally, you know, in this race. We want to be in the middle. And this brings us to the Global South perspective, because Global South also doesn't want a bipolar world. This is a difference maybe with the Americans. Maybe Americans will push us a little bit into this because it's simpler. You know, Americans like simple things, like, you know, this is bad, this is good, this is black, this is white. Europeans are more sophisticated, maybe. We see nothing is really, everything is gray, yeah? Everything is complicated. And Global South adds to this vision that nothing maybe it's necessary to be even named. You know, Asian mentality, I don't know, there are Asian colleagues with us here, maybe you could help me to explain it. It's not necessarily to name everything. Maybe we don't need a global order based on something. Maybe we will face a global disorder for decades. And you know, the Asians are okay with that. So Poles, by the way, also we are able to survive in many different circumstances. So maybe our mentality to be able to finalize something. Now, it doesn't help because nothing will be finalized in the years to come. It will be like disorder, chaos, a lot of dynamics from different angles. But what we know, and that I conclude, is that the EU interest is to get stronger internally, that both angles, China, American, help in this process, that in American interest, it's definitely a strong Europe, and what brings us together, Americans and the Europeans, a part of trade, which will continue, is values. And I believe with some of countries of Global South is exactly the same. For example, with India, or with Indonesia, or with Japan or South Korea, you know, let's build on the assumption every country will have our own national interests first. I think that's the reality. But in the same time, there are some countries with whom we feel better. It's like with humans, you know. Some people you like, some people you just don't like, you don't click with. So maybe let's just try to regroup in these groups, smaller groups of countries where we can resonate better in a very complicated and not clear world.
Thank you, Małgorzata. There was a lot of thought-provoking statements there. Good. That's what we like. I don't like the term global south because there's this sort of hidden implication that they agree on everything, which of course they don't. I mean, I visited Africa 2 years ago, and I mean, certainly, you know, I went to Ethiopia. Certainly, Ethiopia doesn't view the trade through the Red Sea the same way as, say, certain people in Yemen do, right? I mean, and both of these countries are in the quote-unquote global south, but they're hugely different. But that's just one particular example. So I know I'm sure that there are a lot of questions for our panel here. We are going to go into questions, but again, moderator's prerogative. China was mentioned a few times. As an American, I'm not sure that everybody in Europe has caught on the fact that how Americans seem to agree on how bad, speaking of black and white, China is. I'm not saying that not one in Europe understands, I'm sure they do, but maybe this is not caught on. Like one of the few things that we seem to agree on in the United States is that China is bad and that, you know, something needs to be done about that. So I guess, like, you know, lightning round to everybody on the panel, and share your thoughts if you want to. If you don't, that's okay. But I mean, some in Trump's orbit are calling for a very clear, harsher stance of China. We have, of course, Robert O'Brien, his last national security advisor, who wrote that the US just needs to totally decouple from China. And I guess, you know, short but specific, like, is Europe prepared for this kind of knock-on effects of a US-China trade war? And if you can give me, like, what is the one thing that Europe should do in that given situation? Anyone who would like to share their thoughts about that? Yes, Nathalie, raise your hand first.
So, I mean, I think it's clear that Europeans on China are not where they were 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago, right? So there has been a hardening attitude towards China, which is partly driven or pushed by the United States, but I think it would be unfair to say that it's only driven by the United States. I think there is a recognition in Europe that there are problematic elements in the EU-European-China relationship, regardless of the United States. Having said this, I think there are 3 main differences when it comes to Europe, China as opposed to US-China, which I think are important for the US to understand in order for our relationship to be clearer on the China question. Point number 1, which actually paradoxically could even lead to a harder European stance towards China than a US one, whereas I think for the US, the question of China is a question of primacy, right? Who is going to have primacy within the international system? We Europeans, we don't have those ambitions, yeah? We know that we're not up there, right? However, for Europe, it's more a question of protection. What I mean by protection is there is greater recognition today than there was a decade ago that the way in which, you know, there's a strategic edge to Chinese investments, for example, in Europe. So there's a difference, I think, there. For the sake of argument, if China was a shining liberal democracy, but it was the prime international player, Europe would not necessarily have a problem with that, right? As opposed to probably with the US that would. That's one, I think, main difference. The second difference has to do with, you know, some of the issues that we've been talking about, the attitude towards trade, right? In the US, there has been a turning back against, you know, free trade. In Europe, although, again, things are different today compared to where they were a decade ago, but still there is an attachment to free trade in a way in which, as I said, and to the multilateral system surrounding it, the WTO, that I think is certainly not there in the same way in the US. And obviously the China question fits into this debate. The third aspect, I think, is difference is climate, right? I mean, it is very clear that if there were to be a decoupling from China, particularly when it comes to green technologies, the EU will not be able to meet its climate targets, right? I mean, of course, we should be doing more in terms of increasing our domestic production on renewables, but without the China component, in and of itself, it's not going to be sufficient. And that, again, I think is something that is more rooted in the EU compared to what it is in the US.
Okay, great, thank you. Tobias, over to you, and then Ambassador, and then
Okay, I'll try my best to be brief. So first of all, what's the recipe? First of all, Europeans need to understand that China is the main security concern in the US. Full stop. And that's not yet everywhere fully understood in Europe. Second, we need to try, and I hope we will succeed, to formulate and at least to update our European China strategy. What I can tell you from my own country is, roughly 1 year ago, the German government for the first time adopted a China strategy because we thought it's necessary. China today is different to the China than it was 10 years ago, so our policies need to change. And we structured that strategy into a multifaceted approach, very familiar from the European side, partnership, competition, and systemic rivalry. And we take into account that, let's say, the relative weight of systemic rivalry is growing and growing. And we need to find some measures, like we call it de-risking, not decoupling, or let's say diversification. And I know from the process how long it has taken in the German government to come to such a strategy and now to implement it, how ambitious it is to do it on the European level. But we need to do it. We cannot do it as member states alone. And if you see that the current European strategy towards China is too old, and if you see the different approaches from European countries, we are not in the best shape. I believe for the next years to come and for the new Commission, that's one of the priorities, to find, when we're speaking about strategic autonomy, to find consensus among the Europeans, what are China's strategy. And last but not least, this is necessary because otherwise, it's necessary to deal with China and to deal with countries in the Indo-Pacific, but it's also necessary and important to be able to deal with the American side. Because our position, as Nathalie elaborated, will not be identical to the US position. We will always be closer when it comes to US vis-à-vis China. We are not in the middle. We will always be significantly closer to the US side. We have always lots of things in common. But the position is not 100 or 95 or 90, maybe, I don't speak about numbers. The position is not identical in the end. But to see where we have things in common, where we can act together, where we can convince our American friends, we also see your security interests, and we are willing to act, not by the same ways and means maybe, but by others, but we are willing to act, we are willing to respect that in our economic and trade policies. We need to clarify our own position as Europeans. And if you see, I see my French colleague sitting there, if you see the recent visit of Xi Jinping in Europe, and I do not speak about Paris, I speak also about other countries, there is some necessity to come to that clarification among the European countries. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Over to you, Ambassador, and then just like a follow-up question, I guess, is there a chance that maybe Europe could, reinforce the pro-free trade voices in the United States? I don't know, like propose a new TPP or something with a different acronym. Of course, you can't use the same acronym because that's going to fail, but something different to like kickstart those positive voices that are there. Maybe there was a divergence.
No,
but
I will speak on China because you asked me to speak on China. But on your follow-up question, I already answered it. I think in hoping that we can deepen the TTP, which has been created by the European Commission and the U.S. administration just after Joe Biden's election, but which has not been given its full potential. And it requests for each side, including the American side, I must say, it means to accept to go deeper and to coordinate. You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. I said it was normal to take decisions for your country, but we need more coordination, even ex-ante coordination. This is really important. And then we can get to much more ambitious results also in our trade. But I wanted to make a couple of points on China. First, on the US, my experience, you know better, of course, as American, but it is not only, of course, as you said, Minister, we Europeans, we must be still more aware. I think we're pretty aware already, but we must be more aware about the priority of this Chinese element for all American stakeholders. Okay, It's as a security challenge, as a technological challenge, that's clear. But there is a second dimension, as I see it in the US, which is how you manage competition. I refer to Jake Sullivan's recent visit to Beijing, for instance. This is also an issue which, whatever administration is in Washington, and for the rest of the world, it is not indifferent to see the two biggest powers, how they behave one with the other. So you have the two aspects. And Robert O'Brien is a good friend of mine, but if I were with him, I would ask him what he means by decoupling. Does he mean total decoupling, 100%, which seems unrealistic, or total decoupling for the most sensitive technological subjects, which can be quite large already? It would be interesting. The second point is that the European Union has evolved a lot in its relation with China. I witnessed it already 10 years ago when I was permanent representative to the European Union. I was also in Germany ambassador when you had the KUKA takeover, I remember. We have changed our position a lot, not only in the general, political attitude, but also on very, very specific legislative instruments. And of course, and this is a point which has been made by Nathalie, by Małgorzata, we are not in the same position like the US, but like Tobias said, we are not either equidistant between the US and China. We have adopted very, very, very strong policies. And one element which has given rise to this awareness with China, I think I was in Brussels at that time, was during the financial crisis, the sovereign debt crisis, the way that some strategic infrastructures in Southern Europe were taken over by Chinese entities. Now we have grown more adult, but we are not in the same position. And you asked about the effects of this Chinese policy in the US. They are already there. And Nathalie mentioned the green technologies. Look at the electric vehicles issue. Canada just followed the American lead on very high tariffs against imports of electric vehicles. All the other countries in the world now struggle and scramble with how do we do with the Chinese EVs, investment by Chinese companies or higher tariffs. So we have already today the consequences of American policies toward China. And I think we need to coordinate still better with the US and to coordinate, as I said, a bit ex ante. And my last point is one of the difference between the US and the EU towards China and the world in general is that on climate, but also on other aspects, we are in another position in Europe to have a discussion with the other continents and what you call the global south, and especially in Africa, because you have the two dimensions, transatlantic, transpacific, but who cares about the north-south dimension? And here the European Union has I think the best position, together with other countries, maybe like Brazil, like India, like the Middle East, like Africa. We have to contribute to what was the topic of the previous panel, the shaping of something which can be indeed a bit a disorder, as Małgorzata said, but which must be a bit better organized. And here I think it is a role of the European Union also to discuss this with the United States to explain we must go to common positions. I cannot understand why on the WTO, for instance, even with this administration in the US, we cannot come to closer positions on reforming the WTO, for instance, because we have the same concerns about fair level playing field, for instance. We should go to a common understanding. And I think the European Union, as Nathalie said, is more prone to free trade, can be the leader among the Western powers and discuss this with the United States.
Clear action item, that's great. Jakub, you raise your hand briefly because we do have to give the audience a chance.
Okay, shortly. I want to speak as a Pole, but also Central European. I think for many of us, China is ordinary people, is still an enigma. Its tanks has not have not rolled on our streets. Our people have not been massacred by Chinese, which means that there is still a lot of question marks. At the same time, we come to realize that certain illusions, especially that of these of Eurosceptics in our countries, are not well sounded. For example, that China in some magical format of 16 or 17 plus 1 can be an innocent investor, helper, maybe a lever, counterpower to some colleagues in the European Union that we do not like. No, it does not fly. And we actually come to realize, tragically, that the Chinese could end the war between Russia and Ukraine in 24 hours. Maybe more so than American president can do. So this takes the scales of our eyes. We come to realize that there is a danger, but there is also great opportunity, or at least possibility to avoid gigantic problems of decoupling. I think it's my personal opinion. Americans have a lot of illusions, these hawkish Americans, that you can cut the world Western hemisphere from China in a very simple manner. No, go to every supermarket and 70% of goods will be Chinese. So it's very difficult, and actually you can talk reason to them. I mean, Duda, my president, was in Beijing, and of course, conversations were not so easy, but he managed to get certain things out of them. For example, we are an object of hybrid war waged on us by Belarusians, who are letting all these confused migrants, sometimes even criminals, go across the border. And this is in direct contrast with Chinese interest to have a working crossing between borders of between countries of Belarus and Poland. So to make a long story short, it was the Chinese who applied some pressure on Belarusians to sort this out. And let me give you another example, because when we talk China, we need also to talk India. And very recently there was a very epoch-making visit of Modi to Warsaw, but also Kiev. I think it's a missing link in our puzzle, because without Indians, without certain pro-Western instincts among the Indians, we will not be able to navigate China very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakub. I mean, we do have to go to the audience, but I mean, I know you raised, if you could be very brief, Małgorzata, then we have.
Just 2 points. One is that really have to do our own job instead of always discussing US and China. Let's just concentrate on work. And I think that brings us to the global South countries, to the previous question. The best way to approach this China race is to do business and to have contacts with other huge countries of global South, such as India, which is, by the way, by population even bigger today. And it's with all the, weaknesses of this democracy, but it's still a democratic country. And other giants like Indonesia, all the members of G20 who are not from the West. So let's concentrate on that, because there are ways that we can withdraw business from China and move it to these countries. And it's very much in these countries' interest as well. So this will bring us much closer, and this would also repair the image of the Europeans in the regions of Global South. Don't forget, it's not the case of Central Eastern Europe, but it's the case of Western Europe. Western Europe is perceived as a former colonial power, which Russia is not. So Russia plays with this argument, and Russia positions itself as a leader of Global South, together with China maybe. We could jump into this narrative and say, okay, that's not really nothing on the table. We have something on the table for you, because I think it's not only about the words, it's also about very concrete offer you can give to these countries.
Great point. Again, called agency. And speaking of agency, now it's time for questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please identify yourself, say who you are, and please make sure that what you're saying ends with a question mark. I am told that there are a lot of friends here from young Bled, so I'm going to give the young voices here the first chance. So please raise your hand if we see. Yes, right over there, gentleman in the front row. Yeah, I think the mic is coming.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Vuk Velebit. I come from Belgrade, Serbia. And I work on strengthening US-Serbia relations. My question is for Mr. Tobias. I would like more to understand of course, speaking about Western Balkans, how do you see the current relations between, or the current approach between Germany and the United States towards Western Balkans? And what would be the role of Germany if the US withdraws from the region more in the upcoming period? And speaking about that, why did Germany played against, to some extent, against the Open Balkan Initiative, which was backed by United States?
Okay, how much time do we have?
Now it's too much. You know, the clock
No, honestly, it's always good if the Europeans and you ask the Germans and the Americans are on the same side, on the same page when it comes to the Western Balkans, for sure. We know the importance of the region for security as well as for prosperity in Europe. And I can tell you from a German perspective, we are well aware that if we make an offer, and I believe that offer was absolutely right, to Moldova, to Ukraine, to Georgia, if conditions are fulfilled, we need to keep the Western Balkans in mind on its pathway inside the European Union. Full stop here. Second, we need to take into account when it comes to transatlantic relations that even if we are on the same page, the European toolbox is different because our main tool is EU accession. And I'm very much in favor that we are making progress on EU accession. I'm in favor of reviewing the mechanism, how to at least open negotiation chapters with countries. I've learned, even though I'm not dealing with EU relations in itself, I've learned and I've recognized that over the past 2-3 years, we haven't made progress on chapters with respect to accession negotiations. And I'm personally in favor to have the idea, can we have a mechanism like qualified majority voting or something, at least to open the chapter, to get some dynamic, because we both know that we have some issues to solve between the EU and Serbia, between other countries on the Western Balkans. So let's do this. Let's sit on one table and let's get started. That would be my answer to your question.
Thank you. Another gentleman in the front row.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. 2 questions. One would be, of course, as before the fading of Pax Americana, Bill Clinton famously said, it's about economy. There's a meme going on that says that the United States innovates, that China replicates, and that Europe regulates. And as we can see, the US tech platforms and so on are taking huge advantages in Europe. We're trying to regulate that. At the other side, we're seeing Chinese manufacturing and consumer goods taking, as you mentioned, a lot of shelves in European, and we can even saw that with the likes of BYD, Hisense, and Alipay taking more sponsorships in the European football championships in Germany just this summer. So my question, Tobias, would be for you, shouldn't the Inflation Reduction Act actually be a wake-up call for Europe and not a threat, and what we can do to mitigate this? And my other question would be regarding the keep calm and waiting for the results of the elections. As you remember, Trump didn't happen in a vacuum. He happened in 2016 after the Brexit vote. And if we're looking at what's happening in Europe right now as democracies, we saw the results of the European elections, we saw the results of the French elections, and now we saw the weekend results in Germany. So my question would be, isn't just Pax Americana, and Philippe, this is for you, isn't just Pax Americana fading, but isn't liberal representative democracy, as we know it, since now fading? Thank you.
It was one for Germany and one for France. I guess we'll start where, since you had the floor last, so we'll start with the question for you, Ambassador.
On the first point, regulating, replicating, innovating, replicating, regulating. There is a very, very interesting case, which is a recent adoption by the European Union of the first artificial intelligence regulation, first among the nations, advanced technological nations. I think that this is. I negotiated myself the regulation for the protection of privacy and in Korewa in Brussels. We have to draw the lesson from this. It gives us in Europe more power. for the GDPR is an extraordinary instrument for influence, but indeed it is not enough. And we have created the internal market in the 1970s and 1980s, but it is not complete. And we should follow, I speak personally, the Letta report's conclusions. We have, with our internal market, we have an extraordinary instrument, but it doesn't work well, in particular in the field of technology. It is not normal that we are not able to grow more our startups, which are so many across the European Union. So my feeling is that this is not a bad way to describe the things. It is a reality. It is not that we should be against regulation. We should continue to be for regulating. It's part of our DNA, but we should be much, much more efficient on the side of promoting technologies and implementing technologies through our internal market. And on democracy and the elections, frankly, democracy, I loved what the President Danilo Turk said on the last panel. Democracy is not just a general idea. Democracy is in the reality. We are facing, and somebody yesterday in the plenary mentioned the incredible importance of the information, the battle against the manipulation of information. This is what is at stake in our democracies today. And this is something which unites the United States and the European democracies. We must be very, very serious in modernizing our democracies, but from the bottom, not as a general speech.
Thank you. I mean, the other part of the question was directed to you.
Okay, so one comment on democracies, for sure. Disinformation is one of the big issues, but also, you know, as a German, we just had elections on Sunday in two of the states. We as politicians need to act differently, and we need to take into account that societies have changed and that the way how people interact and how they inform themselves, that has changed. And we need to find recipes how to react to that. It's not sufficient just to complain about disinformation. Disinformation is a big part. On the economic issues, 3 quick points. First of all, I don't believe that the Europeans are more stupid or less intelligent, as you might take it, than the Americans or the Chinese. If you look, for instance, on AI, I'm more concerned on the capital side and on the size of companies, how models are, with respect to AI, for instance, how they're able to grow. And in regulation, I would say, okay, the Europeans at least, they regulate something, while others usually hesitate to regulate. Now, if you take AI again, the EU AI Act is something I believe is really smart because we do not regulate the algorithm in itself. We regulate the outcome. I believe that's a smart approach. But in the end, when it comes to IRA and to China, on China, let me emphasize, it's about critical one-sided dependencies when it comes to diversification. It's not about the T-shirt beneath my shirt or something. It's about critical one-sided dependencies we should focus on. And we should focus on market activities that are not fair. And I very much welcome the Europeans are now checking WTO measures against or with respect to a WTO member named China on EVs. I believe that's the right approach to stay within the framework. And I'm a German, I like to play very much by the rules to remind the others which rules they have signed. Last but not least, on the IRA, yes and no. The IRA is something from an American's perspective really, really smart, and I think it helps to boost innovation and also consumption. I'm afraid if the Europeans would just copy that and would copy it in a bad way, we are back to protectionism. We are getting more and more away from free trade. So let's use the time and let's engage with the next American administration, whoever it might be, on, let's say, a smart framework where, for instance, we regulate or we take into account the carbon footprint of a car, but with a in a way that we are still able to trade. If we just open our own European IRA box, without speaking to the Americans, if it's compatible to the other side, that's a big risk for trade, I believe.
Thank you. I mean, Małgorzata, you raised your hands.
Just one short comment concerning this democracy. We are also facing, of course, the consequences of being democratic societies in a state of war. I think we just forget about it because we discuss war in Ukraine and we think about it, that it's the war somewhere else. It's there, and it's physically there. But Russia started a war against the whole West, not only against Ukraine. And this is in information terms. We are at war as far as information space and media and social media. And it started in 2014, and it's very open. Don't forget that Russia, as a state spends more than $350 million every year for disinformation techniques. And what they do is, it's both in the US and in the EU, different countries, they use elections. They start to put problems in our heads because we are free societies. And we cannot respond to this the same way because they are not free societies. Russia or even other stakeholders like China, they don't have a free, open society to discuss the things like we are discussing now. Everybody can hear that, right? So we are in danger, and we should be a little bit more careful as people, not thinking that the war is somewhere else. The war is with us, but in different terms, not with tanks and weapons like that, but in space of information, disinformation especially, and also cyber attacks. Cyber attacks, we are constantly, Poland is one of the countries, the most, I think, attacked right now. And don't forget one more thing. When we have such a war, it's not about Russia, China, or US as far as topics. This war is about our own emotions. We had a research on that, and for example, in the Balkans, they put in the internet, the Russian bots put in the internet topics concerning, emotions between the people. In Poland, they put it against Ukrainians or Lithuanians or Germans. They fit with different narratives in different countries. And this leads towards the situation you described.
Thank you. We still have time for more questions, comments, or whatever, as long as there's a question mark. Yes, over there.
Thank you. My name is Platon Petre Claudiu from National Administration Association, Romania. So I have one remark and one question. Why, if we want to stop Putin and want to stop the war in Ukraine, why we do not confiscate their assets in EU and in the free world? It will be a very easy thing to do to stop the war. Cutting his access to finance. We will not talk about disinformation, about financing his networks in the Balkans and everywhere. So why, as European Union and US, do not do this immediately? This is my question. And how to do it? Immediately. I repeat, it's urgent. Thank you.
In the name of urgency, yes, we'd like to tackle that question. Jakub, yours was nodding. Maybe Nathalie as well. No, okay, go ahead.
I won't tell you exactly how to do it, but what you're saying, dear Romanian colleague, is music to Polish ears. We are a hawk as it goes. We want to go after frozen assets of Russia wherever possible. We would like to cut them out of the financial system, but at the same time, we are realistic. Russia's economy is not doing so badly given the circumstances. Why? Because Russia is a rich country as natural resources go, and they have accumulated this firepower, this economic firepower for certain years, for the last decade, and now they are spending it like crazy in order to wage war. That leads me to conclusion that what is needed most on our side is self-awareness. We as the West put together, we are much more potent economically, militarily, politically than Russia. And if only we could be united in our response to helping Ukraine, this war would be over very soon. So, and I agree with you, this financial instrument is one of the most important tools in our portfolio.
Thank you. That was couldn't agree more. Lady way over there in the back. You raised your hand.
My name is Sabina Lange. I have a simple question. I heard a lot about we need to explain and we need to understand the Americans. My question is, are we listening enough? And are we listening enough, or do we have sufficient and good analysis and institutions where we can actually listen to understand those that we try to persuade? Meaning, are our institutions in place, be it the UN or an institution of diplomacy, equipped still today to actually listen and give space to perhaps some other voices? Because only by understanding those others as well, we can perhaps, or I think we can act and persuade them, basically. So basically the listening element. Thank you.
Not an easy question.
To Nathalie, I think first, and then well,
okay.
I'd be happy
Not
to
an easy question, but you jumped on it.
Well, I think it's an incredibly important question. And let me say to it, and taking this example of the Global South that we've been discussing a little bit about it. Now, you know, we may not like the term Global South. And we may have, as you were saying, very good reasons not to think that it's accurate. Geographically speaking, different interests. But the point is, going to Sabina's question, the Global South likes the Global South, right? and so it's important to listen to what it is that they like about it. And fundamentally, what they like about it is something which is not very nice for us to listen to, which is the fact that they want to change the system. And they want to change the system because they think that the order has been unfair to them. And this is why, again, you know, sort of these uncomfortable things that come from these countries, I think are important for us to listen to. They want to change the system because it's been unfair to them, and this gives an edge to countries like China and Russia that are not part of the Global South, but that also want to change the system for very different reasons. Now, it's all very uncomfortable, but until and unless we acknowledge it and listen to it, we're not going to come up with the kind of policy recipes that are going to give us an edge vis-a-vis these countries compared to, for example, Russia and China. And again, you know, there are things that these countries are telling us that are very uncomfortable. Of course, there's the question of the colonial baggage. Okay, I mean, you know, there's only so much that can be done about it. But there are things that we've been doing even very recently that have been essentially validating many of the criticisms they have towards us. Think about the vaccine hoarding. Think about the climate finance, which is not coming to the extent that it should. You know, there are a number of things that we're continuing to do. Think about the way in which we reacted in the energy crisis, the gas hoarding. So there are a number of things that we continue to do today that are very much the product of that not listening that Sabine, I think, was referring to.
Thank you. We're pretty much out of time. I guess, you know, to wrap it up, I think, you know, the panel was about, you know, Pax Americana in the United States. It was a great question about, you know, listening to the Americans. And sure, I mean, full disclosure, I'm half American, half Polish. So we can listen to Americans, but I think it's also important, I think, and hopefully the panel will agree with me, that Europe has agency of its own, right? I mean, we have France, Poland, Germany, Italy. These are great countries, and there are many other great countries in Europe. We do not have to, and we shouldn't wait for whatever is going on in the United States. We have plenty of agency or plenty of problems to tackle, and I think Europe can definitely do that. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to the audience. Please give the panel a big round of applause. I'd like to thank the audience as well. Thank you to Peter. I don't think Peter is here, but I would just like to thank him too. Thanks so much.